Epilogue for Alexander's Bridge by Willa Cather. This is a Librivox recording. All Librivox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, visit LibriVox.org. Epilogue. Professor Wilson had been living in London for 6 years, and he was just back from a visit to America. One afternoon, soon after his return, he put on his frock coat and drove in a hansom to pay a call upon Hilda Burgoyne, who still lived at her old number off Bedford Square. He and Miss Burgoyne had been fast friends for a long time. He had first noticed her about the corridors of the British Museum, where he read constantly. Her being there so often had made him feel that he would like to know her, and as she was not an inaccessible person, an introduction was not difficult. The preliminaries once over, they came to depend a great deal upon each other, and Wilson, after his day's reading, often went round to Bedford Square for his tea. They had much more in common than their memories of a common friend. Indeed, they seldom spoke of him. They saved that for the deep moments which do not come often, and then their talk of him was mostly silence. Wilson knew that Hilda had loved him. More than this he had not tried to know. It was late when Wilson reached Hilda's apartment on this particular December afternoon, and he found her alone. She sent for fresh tea and made him comfortable, as she had such a knack of making people comfortable. "How good you were to come back before Christmas! I quite dreaded the holidays without you. You've helped me over a good many Christmases," she smiled at him gaily. "As if you needed me for that! But at any rate, I needed you. How well you are looking, my dear, and how rested!" He peered up at her from his low chair, balancing the tips of his long fingers together in a judicial manner which had grown on him with years. Hilda laughed as she carefully poured his cream. "That means that I was looking very seedy at the end of the season, doesn't it? Well, we must show wear at last, you know." Wilson took the cup gratefully. No need to remind a man of 70 who has just been home to find that he has survived all his contemporaries. I was most gently treated, as a sort of precious relic. But do you know, it made me feel awkward to be hanging about still. 70? Never mention it to me. Hilda looked appreciatively at the professor's alert face, with so many kindly lines about the mouth, and so many quizzical ones about the eyes. "You've got to hang about for me, you know. I can't even let you go home again. You must stay put, now that I have you back. You're the realest thing I have." Wilson chuckled. "Dear me, am I? Out of so many conquests and the spoils of conquered cities, you've really missed me? Well, then, I shall hang, even if you have at last to put me in the mummy room with the others. You'll visit me often, won't you? Every day in the calendar. Here, your cigarettes are in this drawer where you left them." She struck a match and lit one for him. "But you did, after all, enjoy being at home again?" "Oh, yes. I found the long railway journeys trying. People live 1,000 miles apart, but I did it thoroughly. I was all over the place. I was in Boston. It was in Boston I lingered longest." "Ah, you saw Mrs. Alexander?" "Often. I dined with her and had tea there a dozen different times, I should think. Indeed, it was to see her that I lingered on and on. I found that I still loved to go to the house. It always seemed as if Bartley were there, somehow, and that at any moment one might hear his heavy tramp on the stairs. Do you know, I kept feeling that he must be up in his study." The professor looked reflectively into the grate. "I should really have liked to go up there. That was where I had my last long talk with him. But Mrs. Alexander never suggested it." "Why?" Wilson was a little startled by her tone, and he turned his head so quickly that his cuff-link caught the string of his nose-glasses and pulled them awry. "Why? Why, dear me, I don't know. She probably never thought of it." Hilda bit her lip. "I don't know what made me say that. I didn't mean to interrupt. Go on, please, and tell me how it was." "Well, it was like that. Almost as if he were there. In a way, he really is there. She never lets him go. It's the most beautiful and dignified sorrow I've ever known. It's so beautiful that it has its compensations, I should think. Its very completeness is a compensation. It gives her a fixed star to steer by. She doesn't drift. We sat there evening after evening in the quiet of that magically haunted room, and watched the sunset burn on the river, and felt him with a difference, of course." Hilda leaned forward, her elbow on her knee, her chin in her hand. "With a difference? Because of her, you mean?" Wilson's brow wrinkled. "Something like that, yes. Of course, as time goes on, to her he becomes more and more their simple personal relation. Hilda studied the droop of the professor's head intently. You didn't altogether like that? You felt it wasn't wholly fair to him? Wilson shook himself and readjusted his glasses. Oh, fair enough. More than fair, of course. I always felt that my image of him was just a little different from hers. No relation is so complete that it can hold absolutely all of a person. And I liked him just as he was. His deviations, too, the places where he didn't square. Hilda considered vaguely. Has she grown much older? She asked at last. Yes and no. In a tragic way, she is even handsomer. But colder. Cold for everything but him. Forget thyself to marble. I kept thinking of that. Her happiness was a happiness à deux, not apart from the world, but actually against it. And now her grief is like that. She saves herself for it and doesn't even go through the form of seeing people much. I'm sorry. It would be better for her, and it might be so good for them, if she could let other people in. Perhaps she's afraid of letting him out a little, of sharing him with somebody. Wilson put down his cup and looked up with vague alarm. Dear me, it takes a woman to think of that now. I don't, think we ought to be hard on her. More even than the rest of us, she didn't choose her destiny. She underwent it, and it has left her chilled. As to her not wishing to take the world into her confidence, well, it is a pretty brutal and stupid world after all, Hilda leaned forward. Yes, I know. Only I can't help being glad that there was something for him even in stupid and vulgar people. My little Marie worshipped him. When she's dusting, I always know when she's come to his picture. Wilson nodded. Oh, yes, he left an echo. The ripples go on in all of us. He belonged to the people who make the play, and most of us are only onlookers at the best. We shouldn't wonder too much at Mrs. Alexander. She must feel how useless it would be to stir about, that she may as well sit still, that nothing can happen to her after Bartley. Yes, Hilda said softly. Nothing can happen to one after Bartley. They both sat looking into the fire. End of Alexander's Bridge.